Ambassador Jeremiah Mamabolo is briefing the Security Council at the Secretary General's latest 90-day report. Let's go to the United Nations now.
UNAMID has remained vigilant, maintaining a robust posture, particularly in the Jebel Mara area of responsibility, which is where we have peacekeeping troops. The mission's day-to-day operational activities continue. We have intensified our patrols, particularly in and around IDP camps, and we continue interacting with partners on the ground. With regard to the safety and security of UN personnel and assets, I'm pleased to report that so far the UN has not been a target. All our staff are accounted for. Mr. President, allow me to now focus on the Secretary General's report before you. With the adoption of Resolution 2429 on 13 July 2018, the mission continued with its reconfiguration and drawdown. The reduction of military component from 8,735 to 4,050 personnel by the 30th June 2019 is on track. The strength of UNAMID police also decreased from 2,500 to 2,283 personnel. UNAMID police advisors have been deployed to state liaison functions and are also co-located with the Sudan police force. UNAMID and the United Nations country team also continue to implement the transition strategy in preparation for missions withdrawal. In this regard, $15 million was allocated to state liaison functions in the 2018-2019 UNAMID budget for implementation of programmatic activities, with 10 individual United Nations country team entities, with which UNAMID has signed memoranda of understanding in the areas of rule of law, human rights, and resilience and durable solutions for IDPs and host communities. UNAMID staff integrated with United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees have expanded protection monitoring to return areas and areas for which UNAMID has withdrawn. Similarly, United Nations Development Programme and UNAMID have adjusted conflict prevention projects to improve targeting and increase sustainability after the mission's eventual exit. UNAMID staff are also supporting United Nations Population Fund in strengthening prevention and response to gender-based violence, including community-based mechanisms. As regards programmatic activities, a shift in focus from institution to community-based projects may be required in light of the continuation of the state of emergency and uncertainties surrounding the transition modalities. Mr. President, the security situation in Darfur remained calm in the reporting period. However, clashes between the government and SLA Abdul Wahid in Jebel Mara were more frequent but contained to a few locations, while the footprint of the Sudan Armed Forces was readjusted in recent weeks to focus on urban areas in light of the protests. On the 28th January, the government extended the unilateral cessation of hostilities indefinitely, while the movements extended the ceasefire for 3 months on 8 February. Incidents of intercommunal clashes also remained low, while some violence continued to occur between herders and farmers, mainly in North and West Darfur. Humanitarian partners continue to provide assistance in Darfur with a focus on provision of life-saving needs to vulnerable groups through basic social service delivery, particularly for newly displaced IDPs and those affected by conflict. However, their activities continue to face challenges in accessing some areas in Jebel Mara localities in South and Central Darfur due to continued restriction of access by Sudanese authorities on security grounds. UNAMID experienced a total of 10 access denials and 2 restrictions of movement compared to 7 in the previous reporting period. Such access denial prevented UNAMID from verifying reported fighting in several areas of Darfur. In an unexpected development, a UNAMID integrated patrol on humanitarian escort to Fiena village in South Darfur on 26 March was denied access by an SLA Abdul Wahid commander. Mr. President, UNAMID continued to engage the government to further strengthen mechanisms for addressing human rights concerns in Darfur. During the reporting period, UNAMID documented 59 new cases of human rights violations and abuse involving 129 victims. UNAMID also continued to support the re-establishment of the criminal justice chain in return areas, with rehabilitation of rural court and construction of a district court, 3 rural courts, a land registry and prison dormitories for both male and female prisoners in North Darfur. UNAMID, in collaboration with the Sudanese judiciary, also organized mediation training for 25 rural court judges and provided capacity building support through training on human rights and prison duties for 59 newly recruited prison staff. The implementation of the Doha document for peace in Darfur continued to face challenges as a result of capacity and resource constraints. With regards to the peace process in Darfur, and in the context of the changes that have taken place in recent days, the call by the Military Transitional Council on the non-signatory armed movements to engage politically and be part of the ongoing dialogue is yet to materialize into a tangible response. In a recent statement signed by Mr. Malik Aga and Mr. Minimanawi, the Sudanese Revolutionary Front, which includes the Sudan Liberation Army Minimanawi, the Justice Equality Movement Jibril, and the Sudan People's Liberation Army, they distance themselves from the ongoing discussions between the Transitional Council and the Declaration of Freedom and Change Forces, saying it was too early to hold a meeting with the Military Transitional Council. However, the SLA, Minimanawi and Jem Jibril have indicated to the mediation that they still intend to pursue the Darfur peace process in a manner that addresses the underlying causes of the conflict. Their reasoning is that there is a risk should the Darfur peace process be meshed into the current dialogue, because that could lead to conflict in the first place and may not be properly and independently addressed. In this regard, UNAMID, acting in consultation with the Special Envoy of Qatar and in support of the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel, continues to seek ways of commencing talks between the movement and the Sudanese authorities. Mr. President, on his part, the leader of the Sudan Liberation Army, Abdul Wahid Noor, issued a statement on the 13th April rejecting Transitional Military Council, terming it as an attempt to reproduce the previous regime. Council should call on him to seize the opportunity and engage politically with the Sudanese authorities. At this juncture, I wish to say that while we are on track with the mission's drawdown process, the political situation in Sudan has drastically changed and has the potential to affect our mandate implementation going forward. For instance, we were scheduled to hand over the Sector East headquarters in El Dain on 15 April. We have since delayed this handover by 2 weeks, pending further clarity as the state administration keeps changing. UNAMID, meanwhile, is in the process of establishing contact and working relations with the new administration at both federal and state level. Mr. President, Darfur is not and cannot be immune from what is happening at the national level. The incidents of violence in Darfur IDP camps in reaction to the events in Khartoum attest to the fragility of the security situation in Darfur, which had hitherto been increasingly calm and stable. With the exception of Jebel Mara area, it is my hope that the situation does not deteriorate further and have a negative impact of the UNAMID's envisaged exit. Mr. President, the current situation, much as it may not be desirable, provides a chance for the Sudanese to seize the opportunity to resolve all their conflicts, including the one in Darfur. Council should urge the people of Sudan to have a holistic and all-inclusive approach that is representative of all Sudanese. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mamabolo, for your briefing. And I now like to give the floor to Ms. Ursula Mueller. Ursula, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Security Council. Well before the latest developments in Sudan, humanitarian needs in Darfur and other parts of the country were already growing due to the economic crisis. People who have been receiving humanitarian assistance now require greater support. The broader population has also been affected by the worsening economy, and there is a risk that more people slide into greater vulnerability and poverty. Mr. President, the direct impact on humanitarian operations from the recent political events has so far been limited, and regular operations have continued. This includes a major campaign to vaccinate children against polio and measles, and which was carried out in South Darfur and other states. However, the humanitarian community is monitoring the situation closely. We are very concerned about the protection of civilians, particularly in Darfur, where localized fighting continues. Reports of incidents of violence involving internally displaced persons, including internally displaced persons killed in Kalma camp in South Darfur on April the 13th, are worrying. In addition, the start of the school year in Darfur, scheduled for April the 1st, has been delayed, impacting education and services tied to school attendance. Mr. President, the economic crisis in Sudan has had a significant impact on humanitarian needs and operations, including in Darfur. This includes rapid currency devaluation, rampant inflation, increasing prices for food and medicine, and market decline in purchasing power and intermittent shortages of daily bread and fuel supplies. The World Food Programme reports that the price of sorghum is 70% higher compared to the same period in 2017, last year, impacting people's purchasing power for a staple food. And according to the latest analysis, 5.8 million people are presently food insecure, up from 3.8 million the year before. This includes 1.9 million people in Darfur. With the start of the lean season in May, the number will increase. Shortages of imported commodities have also impacted healthcare and other services. According to the Central Bank of Sudan, imports of medicine in 2018 dropped by 1/3 compared to 2017. With increases in costs of medical services ranging from 50 to 100%, households are less able to afford health care and are more vulnerable to health risks. Shortages of food and high prices also worsen protection risks as people turn to negative coping mechanisms and fewer children attend school. Women and the elderly continue to be particularly affected as households are prioritizing food for the children. This situation adds to what were already high and long-standing humanitarian needs. There have been significant improvements in security in recent years, with some people displaced by conflict returning home. Yet 1.9 million people remain displaced by conflict, over 1.6 million of them in Darfur, and many of them have been displaced for well over a decade, as you well know. Hundreds of thousands of children in Darfur are acutely malnourished. In Central, East, North and South Darfur, less than half of the population has access to clean water. The World Food Programme reports that a growing proportion of internally displaced and refugee populations, already among the most vulnerable, cannot afford enough to eat. For these reasons, and thanks to the generous contributions of the member states, the United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund last week allocated $26.5 million to assist vulnerable people in areas which have seen some of the largest increases in food insecurity linked to the economic situation, including in East, North, South and West Darfur. The Sudan Humanitarian Fund is also providing over $20 million in complementary funding. But more support is needed. This year, humanitarian partners are appealing for $1.1 billion to assist 4.4 million of the most vulnerable people, which represents a bit more than half of the overall needs identified in the country, including 2.4 million people in Darfur. Humanitarian needs and response requirements will also be reviewed in the coming months to reflect the ongoing impact of the economic situation, as well as any impact that may emerge from the current political events. Sustaining humanitarian support is particularly important as there continue to be significant constraints on the longer-term development assistance for Darfur and other parts of Sudan. Without expanded social safety nets, the ongoing economic situation will have serious consequences. Greater support for development activities is needed, alongside scaled-up government investment in crucial services such as social protection. Mr. President, the situation in Sudan also has implications for the broader region. I would like to recognize the government's generosity in hosting refugees, including nearly 150,000 South Sudanese in Darfur. And I hope that this support continues. Sudan has also been a vital route for the provision of humanitarian assistance, particularly food aid into South Sudan. With critical life-saving assistance to be provided in the coming days and weeks, we hope the government will continue to facilitate these movements. Mr. President, ensuring that the most vulnerable are supported requires sustained humanitarian access to all people in need. Recent years have seen significant improvements. Partners are able to move more easily and to assist people in more areas, particularly in Jebel Mara. However, we continue to call on all parties in Sudan to allow the humanitarian community to assist people in need. We also call on the government to take further measures to improve the operating environment for humanitarian organizations, especially by lifting of bureaucratic impediments to movement and to facilitate impartial needs assessment and protection activities. At this critical time, it is essential to ensure that the people of Darfur and the rest of Sudan receive the assistance and the support they need. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Mrs. Mueller for her briefing, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of State of Germany.
All right, so that's where we're going to leave that special briefing that's taking place at the moment. We heard from Ambassador Jeremiah Mamabolo briefing the Security Council on the situation in Sudan, particularly in the Darfur region. And he was saying that the report that they were presenting was for the 90 days before the significant changes that took place last week, of course, with President Omar al-Bashir being ousted from office. But he felt and said and appealed to the Council that the changes caused at national level shouldn't affect the pressing matters facing people in Darfur, and that the situation in Darfur cannot be allowed to deteriorate. We also heard from Ursula Mueller, who's the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, also addressing the UN Security Council, and she talked about the many concerns that the Darfuris are facing at the moment. She talked about the continued localized fighting which is taking place in displacement camps. In fact, as recent as last Saturday, 14 people were killed in those camps. She talked about the deterioration in healthcare, education, saying that education and medicines are finding it hard to get into the region, and millions are food insecure. And of course, all of this relates to the conflict which erupted in 2003, where mainly non-Arab tribes took up arms against the Arab-led government led by President Omar al-Bashir. And he's now facing charges at The Hague, of course, the ICC, for killing more than 200,000 people in what's called a genocide. Whether he'll face those charges is another thing, but that's where we're going to leave that humanitarian update to the UN Security Council. All right, we stay with